Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to report that voting is proceeding smoothly at all 22,263 voting stations around South Africa. South African voters continue to come out in their vast numbers to participate in this fifth national and provincial elections. The issues which had affected voting at some isolated voting stations earlier today have all been resolved, and voting is proceeding in these areas. The most pressing challenge we are facing at the moment is an extremely high turnout at voting stations, especially those in urban and metro areas where long queues continue to be experienced at a number of voting stations. It should be remembered that we have the highest number of voters registered in South Africa's history for these national and provincial elections, 25.3 million. This is about 2.2 million more than were registered for the 2009 elections. While we have increased the number of voting stations since 2009 by over 10%, many of the additional voting stations were introduced in rural areas to decrease the distances which voters were required to travel to vote. We have introduced voting centers with multiple voting streams in urban and metro areas for this election, and this is something which we may have to increase in future elections based on the large volumes we are experiencing today. The high turnout at some stations and the long queues are also having an impact on voters seeking to vote at voting stations where they are not registered. They are able to do this in a national and provincial election according to Section 24A of the Electoral Act. The impact of this, however, has been to put pressure on our planning and logistics, and we have received reports of some stations requiring additional materials. We are pleased to report that our contingency planning in this regard is holding up well, and materials are able to be relatively quickly provided to voting stations where they are needed. With respect to voting stations which experienced delays earlier today, we are pleased to report that they are all open, with the last station opening at about 14:50 today in Maruleng in Limpopo. The Electoral Commission will be meeting later today to assess the situation at these and other voting stations which have experienced high volumes. Voting continues until 9 o'clock tonight at all stations, and we remind voters that any voter who is at the voting station at 21 hours tonight and who is in the queue will be allowed to vote. I thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
I'm opening the floor for questions. We are going to take the first batch of questions and then take the last one. If I may request my colleagues with microphones, I'm going to start here and then followed by the gentleman in front, and then the one next to him, and then there's a hand at the back. If we may please proceed, introduce yourself. And then, though, if your question has been raised by someone else, let us please reserve it. And there's a lot of people in the center now. If we may please raise our voice. Let's proceed.
Philip de Wet from the Mail and Guardian. We have reports of a voting station in Alexandra being closed. What appears to be serious complaints and allegations against IEC officials in that area. Do you have any of the facts to hand?
Hi, Stim Sustole from SABC Digital News. I would like to know whether the IEC is aware that there's a school in Skeelgrass where they...
A school where?
In Pretoria, Skeelgrass, where they ran out of the ballots, and one of the IEC officials had to photocopy them, and people used them to vote. And secondly, I just want to know, how many complaints has the IEC so far received regarding voting? Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, Matuba from ENCA. I would like to ask about campaigning today by political parties, because I think the media is being caught up in fights between political parties discrediting each other at the last minute while people are going to the polls. We may know what's written on paper about campaigning on the last day, but I'd like to please, the advocate to please clarify about campaigning on today and what the rules are.
All right.
Franz Luagamachate from Progressive Independent News Agency. My question is more about the campaigning. I understand the campaigning ended last night, but then at the moment there is a particular political party that is campaigning in Pretoria Central, Arcadia, and Sunnyside. I was there about 15 minutes ago. They were campaigning just outside the voting station, the NG Kerk in Arcadia. So what kind of penalties organizations such as that will receive?
Let me take the last question, and then I'll then request the panel to provide answers.
Thank you very much. Konita Hunter from the New Age newspaper.
Please give us your volume.
Thank you very much. Konita Hunter from the New Age newspaper. Very quickly, I would like to know, to follow up on that question about campaigning. ANC Secretary General Gwede Mantashe said that as far as he knows, the distribution of T-shirts is not regarded as taboo by the IEC, and so their party agents can do that as long as it's outside of the voting parameters. And apparently he has alleged that some of their members have been arrested because of that. Could you perhaps be able to clarify that? And with regards to just the distribution of T-shirts anywhere across the country, how does the IEC see that? And then just an add-on with regards to the material, if a voting station, like we've just heard, in areas such as Midrand, and then there's areas in the East Rand, they've run out of ballot papers, and they have to wait for at least 2 to 3 hours. There are people that are still waiting in the queues. Will these centers be open for a longer period of time after 9 p.m.? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Let me allow the panel to provide answers to the following questions. Chairperson.
Is this on? Hello, can you hear me? Thank you very much. I'm going to answer just one question, and my colleagues will take the other questions, particularly of operational nature. Insofar as campaigning is concerned, the law is clear that no political event can take place on voting day. So campaigning finished 12 midnight last night. The second issue is regarding the T-shirts. It is true that the law does not prohibit the distribution of T-shirts. However, we as the IEC, we raised this matter with political parties at the PLC today. And my colleagues informed me that they also raised these on a one-on-one basis with the political parties involved, and that they got an undertaking from those political parties that they will ensure that the distribution of T-shirts does not take place next to the boundary of the voting station, because within the boundary of the voting station, there is only one activity that is allowed, and that is voting. And if the activities that are taking place outside the boundary of the voting station, but very close to the boundary, and they impede the access of the voters to the voting station, then the presiding officer has to intervene and ensure that voters are not disturbed and their access into the voting station is not impeded. And that is what the law provides. As I've indicated, that the law is clear on campaigning, and campaigning cannot take place today. No political event, no march, or any other event of such nature is allowed on this day in terms of the law. My colleagues will respond to the rest of the questions because they are of an operational nature, and maybe these issues have been brought to their attention. Thank you very much.
The question related to the station in Alexandra. There was conflict between political parties there, which our officials tried to resolve without success. However, the province was able to intervene, and voting at the station has been restored, so the station is functional. The issue about ballot papers. Because of the movement of voters between voting stations, what does happen is that an imbalance occurs in the distribution system. However, there are enough ballots overall in the system for every person who's registered to vote. There is no ballot shortage. There may be minor instances of an imbalance which we are responding to. Our system is planned such that we are able to respond to these instances in a very short time. Our information is that there is no voting station that took more than 2 hours without being operational because of the ballot paper. Related to that is the question about voting ballot papers that have been photocopied. We want to have the details of the relevant school to investigate because we do not have that information at the moment. We've had about 260 complaints logged on our voting station and issue tracker system as of morning, and over 250 of those have been resolved and closed. Like we indicated in the morning, the colleagues who work behind yourselves are resolving those issues as they are reported either by political parties or members of the public. Thank you.
Let me take the last group of questions. I'm going to start with the gentleman there. Come through to you. Is your hand up? All right, and then that way and that way. Proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jan Newberg for the Sunday Times. Just to follow up on Philip de Wet's question regarding Alexandra. Alexandra has a lot of polling stations, so maybe we weren't referring to the same one. Information we have is that from a Roma polling station in 2nd Avenue, Alexandra, that the IFP laid a complaint supported by the DA that ID books were being smuggled into the polling station. Was that the sort of complaint that you received, and have you dealt with it?
Hello. Hi, Franz Wild from Bloomberg here.
Okay.
The police is reporting that there were 97 election-related arrests. Could you give us an idea of what the most serious of those were about exactly?
Evening, James Stein from Beeld. Mr. Kula, I wonder, handing out of T-shirts, is that not in the electioneering? I mean, I'm just wondering how you determine what is electioneering and what is not. If you could just clarify that. Another issue I'd like some clarity on is the matter that it appears you could vote at any polling station in your province. But that seemed to have been kind of, nobody really knew about that until you actually tried voting at another polling station. Could you just tell us whether that has been public knowledge or not? And a final question, has any voting station across the country closed, finished, everyone's voted, or does everyone have to remain open until 9 o'clock? When do you expect the first results? Thank you.
Hello, Anton Meyer from Jacaranda FM. We received reports of people in hotspots threatening to burn down buildings and tents after the stations have closed at 9. Will security services be provided to voting stations after 9? Thank you.
Alrighty.
Hi, Carl Ganeski from the Business Day. Does the IEC at this point have any clear picture on what voter turnout's like? Do you, for example, know how many people pass through voting stations by a certain time, such as midday? And sorry, just a second quick question. How many observers are accredited to observe these current elections? And who made the decision on how to accredit or not to accredit consular staff, just heads of missions? Thank you.
Hi, it's Karine Duplessis from City Press newspaper. I have a question. Mampela Rampele earlier tweeted she caught an official with ballot papers that were not in a sealed box. I just want to know if you received a complaint like that and how it was resolved, and whether you've received similar other complaints.
Thank you very much. Let us allow the panel just to deal with 6 questions before we move towards wrap-up. May I please request CEO, are you the first to go?
There was a question raised about ID books being smuggled into a voting station. That matter has not come to our attention. We'll look at it. We've been provided the voting station, and Yan will follow that up. But I do need to point out that it would be interesting, to find out if they've been smuggled, what the intention would be. I would imagine that in Alexander, for that matter, it's a township I know very well. There will be party agents from other parties. It should be very difficult for anybody to do anything untoward. So I'm fairly comfortable that it's a situation we'll deal with. There was an issue about 97 or so arrests and how serious these are. We do not know. The police deal with these things. We do not deal with classification of cases and seriousness and so on and so forth, except to say that anyone violating the law, whether it's the Electoral Act today or some other piece of legislation, the police would be in a position to do so, and I think they would be better placed to deal with those. There was a question about security services being provided after 9 at voting stations. The security of the nation does not close at a certain point. But the stations where we are operational will continue to be safeguarded until our job is done. There may be arrangements in communities, I imagine, that are made, but I can only relate to the fact that every one of the stations where we are operational will be safeguarded until our operations are completed. I would not be in a position to deal with other things that happen afterwards. We might just deal with the police. The stats on voter turnout, every station will pick up stats on voter turnout, but we will not be sharing those in between because it'll disrupt, particularly those stations that are very busy. One of the reasons why we use a zip in the voting station for this election, it's precisely for that reason, to harvest voter participation data. But that data is very rich data for us because it also tells us when these stations become very busy. In other words, were we busy today early in the morning? Did we peak at lunchtime or did we peak at the closing time? And this really helps us to plan for every election, how well we are doing. And it also helps to verify that data that we have on the voters' roll with data we harvested. Observers, how many? There are 78 domestic observer groups, not individuals, groups. In other words, bodies of observers that we have accredited. There are 24 international bodies of observers that we have accredited. The accreditation of observers is prescribed in law and it is done by the Electoral Commission. In instances that you referred to, we are not dealing with observers. We are dealing with nations represented in the Republic on which arrangements not in terms of the Act, are made by agreement between ourselves and the interested bodies in consultation with others that are affected by it. We had a question about votes that were not in the ballot box that an individual member or staff member of the Electoral Commission was found to have. We are looking at the matter. Our preliminary indication was that these were special votes that were cast and were in envelopes as they should be, and these are the ones that would be reconciled in the voting station. There should be absolutely no reason why they should not be in the stations if there have been special votes that were applied for and granted by the Electoral Commission. You will recall that these special votes are going to be reconciled tonight and they will be counted with the regular votes that were casted in the day today. I think those are the questions that I had. So I don't know if I've missed something else.
I think there was one question that was directed at me specifically regarding distribution of T-shirts and how we interpret that. The law is very clear. It prohibits on voting day the holding or taking part by any person in any political meeting, march, demonstration, or other political event. That is what is prohibited on voting day. And the law, and you can look at it yourself, it's Section 108 of the Electoral Act. And if you go to Section 98 of the same Act, it says, among others, that anyone who contravenes the section that I've just referred to, who contravenes Section 108, commits an offense. So, if a political party feels that another political party or its supporters has contravened the provisions of the section that I have just read by taking part in a political meeting, event, march, or demonstration, then that matter is a matter for the law enforcement agencies, and it has to be reported to the police. And we encourage political parties to do so, to report these matters to the police. The second issue I think that has not been addressed is the one relating to where people can vote. Yes, the law does allow voters who vote. It says that voters can vote outside their voting stations. If they are within their provinces, they will get both the national and the provincial ballot. If they vote outside the provinces where they are registered, they then forfeit their national ballot. Yes, that provision is there. We have communicated it, but we've been communicating it quite carefully because we encourage voters to vote where they are registered. We encourage them to vote where they are registered, but indeed, the law does make provision that a voter can vote at a voting station other than the one where he or she is registered.
I just wanted to deal with two issues that were raised earlier on. The first one relates to the ballot papers that are photocopied. In terms of the law, particularly Section 41, which allows for objections at the presiding officer level, and Section 48 and 49, which deals now with the objections during counting, that any political party or agent during counting can actually object if they find that their ballot papers that have actually been photocopied. Our understanding is that there is no ballot paper that has actually been photocopied. And any ballot paper that has been photocopied will not be valid and will not be accepted for the purpose of these elections. There are security measures that we've put in place for all the ballot papers that have been printed, and it is important that we stick to that. So any political party that finds at any of the stations that there are ballot papers that have been photocopied, they must lay not a complaint but an objection in terms of Section 48 and 49. The second aspect relates, and I think this sometimes creates a little bit of confusion, on campaigning aspect. Sometimes when members of public find a political party having tables outside the voting station with a voter's roll, they say that is campaigning and they complain about this. In reality, it is allowed in law for political parties to have tables outside the voting stations. We have given the political parties copies of the voter's roll, and they can use the voter's roll that they have to assist the process and not hinder it. So it is acceptable. The political parties have debated these issues with the Electoral Commission, and we have accepted that arrangement at the National Party Liaison Committee level with all the political parties that has participated. So that is not regarded as campaigning. Thank you.
I'm told I made a mistake. I said you forfeit your national ballot. No, if you vote outside the province where you registered, then you forfeit your provincial ballot, not your national ballot. I'm correcting that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun the countdown to 9 o'clock. Let me thank you for this press briefing. We'll be assembling again at 10 o'clock, just after voting stations have officially opened. Let's keep going. We're on the countdown. We're on the countdown. We're on the countdown, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go, let's get going. 9 o'clock, almost around the corner. See you at 10. Thank you very much.
All right, just a bird's eye.